Hello, and welcome to the latest live stream from Veeam. Today, I'm pleased to welcome a special guest, Steve Costigan from Zadara Storage. Steve, we're going to talk about ransomware today, something that certainly has been extremely topical, but I'd love to just get you introduce yourself and just we'll dive in from there.
Yeah, hi Dave. So Steve Costigan, I've been at Zadara exactly 6 years now. Prior to that, 30 years in the industry. You know, a large amount of that has been in storage, but also service providers and some elements of backup recovery, disaster recovery, and security alongside that. So early years, mainly around NetWare was one of the first MCNEs in there, but also early access into Unix systems, PDP-11s, the back systems. So a great breadth of different systems out there.
Yeah, well, good stuff. I do want to, right off the bat, remind anyone viewing, we do have a team, really a panel of experts on both the Veeam and Zadara side, able to shoot us questions. So feel free to enter your questions at any moment, either about the companies or specifically our topic on ransomware today. And what we wanted to do is first kind of tee up a bit of discussion. I'll call it more of a macro view, a higher level view. There's been some recent webinars that have been done between the two providers around drilling down into ransomware resiliency. My colleague and product strategy team, Rick Vanover, recently did a very specific drill down on Veeam in terms of ransomware and steps you can take, considerations that you need to be aware of, really from a product level and kind of a password, best practices and overall implementation. What Steve and I wanted to do is kind of raise this up, at least initially, and just talk about what is going on in the overall industry. Steve, I'm going to pitch it to you to kind of get us started at kind of what I'll call a macro view of ransomware and the state of the threat vector today.
Yeah, I think we've seen a change in that threat vector. It's interesting. People think of the virus and the ransomware piece as a relatively new coming, but the virus is 50 years old next year. We look at that first virus back in 1971. The creeper virus, and as we look forward now, some of the more recent shifts has been away from trying to infiltrate your information and spread that, and then more towards a ransomware attack over the last 4 years of making your data unavailable to you. And then another shift we're seeing again now, this leak as a service type piece, where people are encrypting data and leaking data if you don't pay up. So it's an interesting shift in the dynamics of what's happening out there.
Yeah, and maybe towards that end, I want to tee up a first graphic here, and what the graphic will show is Veeam at the end of last year, the end of 2019, we conducted a global survey of 1,550 enterprise accounts or customers, data center people, both technical decision makers, IT admins, and executive decision makers, say VP of infrastructure, or those kind of roles. And what we did is we asked them, what do they think is going to be their top concern? What's their top challenge in the upcoming year? Now, obviously, this was really before current global situation with the pandemic, but what did people think was going to be their challenge this year that would concern them the most? Very interesting, they were allowed to vote multiple times. And if we kind of double click or highlight the top one, cyber threats made the top of the list, higher than skill shortages, which have certainly, Steve, we've seen for years, people have been concerned with not enough headcount or not enough full-time equivalents. Economic uncertainty was much lower. You have to believe, coming out of this certain situation we find ourselves in now, that's going to be even higher. But Steve, to your point, economic uncertainty is also triggered or amplified by cyber threat concerns. But just on this list, it's curious to me that for technologists, that are worried about keeping applications up, that are worried about having enough human resource, that are worried about having enough dollars or some other kind of capability or shortage of, cyber threat tops that list.
Yeah, and I think you look at the elements around this, in terms of trying to get specialized people. You know yourself. People are now furloughed. People are working from home more. The IT staff are working from home. You can't just turn around and say, hey, Jim, can you just come and fix my laptop? I've got this problem. It's just not possible anymore. So we're relying more and more on remote tools. That reliance on more tools opens up more threats. Remote desktop protocol, phishing attacks that we're seeing. So trying to have the skill set and the skill set in the right place to be able to answer the threats that are out there, and having the budgets available to counter those threats are becoming an issue for many, many businesses. And I think we're going to see the new norm. We're seeing this more and more people are going to work from home. Yeah. They're going to utilize more cloud-based services. The likes of Office 365 is we're already seeing the growth of that, but that introduces new dynamics in terms of what do you do to protect that data.
It's a great point. And maybe we double click just from a visual perspective. Now, want to apologize to anyone viewing this right now. The point is not to really read every aspect of this slide coming up around the Microsoft Office 365 shared responsibility model. We really just simplistically want to show that on the top side, or in the kind of red area, we've got what Microsoft is really chief focused on and responsible for delivering. And then below that, in the green side, are things that you as a data center professional or you as a customer of O365 have to take into account. And Steve, I kind of liken this a bit to like a rental car, a car for hire service. That provider is going to give you infrastructure. They're going to give you some sort of guarantee that the car will be functional, there will be gas, etc. But then it's up to you how you drive it, where you drive it, the situations that you find yourself in as a result of now taking this infrastructure and taking it out on the road. And the real key on this is that if we kind of highlight it on the bottom there, meaning what's your responsibility, it's really important to understand at the end of the day, it's still your data. That's something we say a lot at Veeam, is that if you vend out to some degree, meaning software as a service, it doesn't abdicate you of your oversight responsibility. So the data is 100% up to you. Now, Microsoft will provide a certain level of capabilities. And, Steve, we sometimes talk around the 30, 60, maybe 90 days, which essentially is a trash bin or recycle basket kind of an approach. But there's a challenge there, isn't there? For example, the average occurrence or the average observation and awareness that there's been a problem occurs far after 90 days. Isn't that right?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the analysis, and Veeam's done some great analysis in this area, 140 days is the average between you having an incident and then noticing that incident has got a validity to it in terms of data recovery, accessibility, and it introduces new dynamics because people just think, hey, the software as a service provider has got my back, they're doing everything I need to do. And that may not necessarily be the case. The shared model, it's interesting you bringing up that car rental model, because you go and buy a car and they try and sell you all of the additional services, don't they? Do you want tire protection? Do you want no waiver damage and all of these things? And really, when you look at O365, that's what you need to do. You need to protect and ensure that you're meeting all of your needs, and they're not just about things that you take in every day. Data deletion, data corruption, bad actors, ransomware attackers, but also for things like compliance, and
Mm-hmm.
what we're seeing over here in Europe, particularly GDPR is a major impact for organizations. And as we move more and more data into disparate cloud services, that means that they're all constantly online. It means that we've got to start to look at different ways of protecting that data. And many organizations are both online and offline. And what I mean by that, they're working in a hybrid model. And I think this is key to where Veeam are heading and where Zadara have been heading since our inception, in terms of this hybrid model is becoming the dominant model as we play out. And I think GDPR fines are going to start to happen more and more for organizations that are not protecting their environment correctly.
Yeah, and I think I'm glad you brought out other aspects of this, meaning data first and foremost, meaning data availability, of course, hits this list. But from a security perspective, from a regulatory data leakage, GDPR perspective, there's still a lot that you need to take into account, and not to focus too much exclusively on O365, but it's one of my favorite SaaS or software as a service examples because, well, really two reasons why. First is most organizations already have experience running Exchange on-prem, and then they've gone to a O365 model. Maybe it's a hybrid model. Maybe they've gone completely. But they've already established a practice, protocols, procedures, service level agreements, and expectations around what the data retention is going to be, what kind of incidents they can recover from, the granularity that they would be able to pull back data from. And going to straight service O365 in the cloud does not necessarily mean you're going to get all of those things that you may have come to expect when it was on-prem. The second thing I really think is interesting and why it's important to properly protect O365 is it's really possibly the only SaaS application where you can actually do something with that data, meaning if you protect it and pull it back, you can then upload that into your email client, your OneDrive, your SharePoint. So you can actually get value out of that if you're protecting it properly and you're able to make that portable, have a solution that enables that. But let's move along a little bit more generally. And if we look at the next graphic, this is something that maybe many of you, actually, hopefully all of you may have heard about. We used to call it the 3-2-1 rule. You can see we've added some digits, but let's just parse that out left to right. So for many years, best practice was considered 3-2-1, meaning 3 different copies of your data, so not just one, 2 different media types so that you weren't dependent upon a specific piece of hardware, and then 1 that's off-site, meaning you could suffer some sort of geographical threat. So flood is but one good example. We've recently been adding to that, and I've seen various variations of this over the years. But the key is really, if we do want to make sure we're enabling those historical best practices, what in terms of fairly recent threat potentials and vulnerabilities, exposures, do we need to take into account? And that's where the next one comes in, having an offline or air-gapped or immutable copy of the data such that it can't be compromised from malicious attack or perhaps accidental deletion or things of that like. But increasingly, as we focus on ransomware, both internal bad actor and external threat, and ransomware that unfortunately lays dormant now for a long period of time and wakes up and attacks backup infrastructure and data. And then the last 0 is, and the reason we highlight that a little bit differently is your sort of last level of good defense here is you want to make sure you've got 0 errors or that you have complete confidence in that backup that you've taken. Because I always like to say, Steve, at the point you revert back to your backup copy of the data, it is no longer a secondary copy. It really is your primary, because at that point, you have lost confidence or flat out lost ability to access, either because of networking, because it's been encrypted or it's been deleted, but you have lost what used to be your primary data. Essentially, now the backup copy has become primary prime, if you will. So all of this becomes really vital. 3 copies of your data, 2 media types, 1 offline, or offsite, I'm sorry, and then offline and immutable, and then having 0 errors or made sure that you've got a good copy of that, a known trusted good copy prior to having to invoke it. Or I love your expression over there, before you have to use this data in anger, or use this capability really in the heat of battle.
Yeah, and it was interesting. I did a webinar with Corinne yesterday, and she exposed this zip code backup analogy, and really it's true, because a lot of organizations they concentrate and focus only on backup. They don't focus on recovery. So everybody's hung up on what's my backup window? What's my backup window? I've seen this many times. I've got to be able to do a full backup in 8 hours, and they forget about the restore. Because it's the restore that's the critical piece, not the backup. Can you actually ensure that your backup actually works? And the analogy is, if you remember, Schrodinger's cat, and if you take that into the backup world and you go Schrodinger's backup, how do you know your backup is actually valid if you never open the box? So you have to open the box, and this is where Veeam, it adds some really additional capabilities. Certainly when we look at data labs and this ability to look into the backup stream, looking at the ability to maybe run an antivirus against your backup, your offsite copy before you actually need it, and validating that, especially when we're looking at this long term, this shift to 30, 60, 90, 140 days before an attack is happening. And that is the shift that we're seeing from ransomware now, is it's lying dormant for a large period, it's entering the backup stream. So if you've not validated your backups and you've gone through a restore process, and you then make that your live copy, and then the live copy is impacted, where do you go from there? So this is raising a different dynamic in the way that we have to think about our backup policies, the way that we operate, the way that people operate, and how you can enable a recovery model that's going to introduce security for the business to continue.
Yeah, and let's bring up a graphic that we'll kind of parse through jointly here, Steve. And as we're doing that, I think the interesting thing here is that availability has taken on a very different dimension now, or more recently, meaning historically we only recovered 2 to 3% of the data we backed up. And the issue with that was you had to protect ideally all of your critical data, because you didn't know which 2 or 3%, and you didn't know what time frame or when you might be pressed to try to recover that. Now, unfortunately, some of the cyber threats, ransomware that we've been talking about, the surface area of attack now goes from 2 to 3% to literally 100% potential. So it really changes our landscape dramatically. And if we look at this slide, it looks busy, but we'll parse through it very quickly. I'll take the left-hand side, more Veeam oriented. And Steve, I'll pass it over to you as we get there to talk about from the Zadara side. But just simplistically think about various workloads. And here we're representing VMware, but certainly, from a Veeam perspective, that could be VMware, Hyper-V, Nutanix, AHV, physical Windows, physical Linux. It could be, Solaris, AIX, etc. But the point being really here, we're just giving you an illustrative example where we ingest a workload in from a couple different servers. We take it into production storage. And again, that could be any kind of servers that we're running on. That could be any kind of production storage, from just a bunch of disks to something more exotic like a HPE dedicated storage array, or something like a flash blade, etc.
Or even Zadara.
Yeah, or certainly Zadara. There's any number of choices. So you've got a lot of flexibility there, but we ingest the data, we bring it in off of production storage, and then bring that over. Now, Steve, I'll hand it over here. Once Veeam captures the data, potentially stores that, maybe we even execute a verification job, that last one. What happens now just from a sort of protection and storage capability over time?
So I think the key elements here is to ensure that you introduce a process that includes air gapping, and this is a critical piece in terms of trying to ensure that there are gaps, physical gaps and logical gaps between each of the stages. So if you take that on-premises, enterprise backup capability, running it against a Zadara virtual private storage array. So we virtualize our storage into a cloud that's truly multi-tenant, truly multi-tiered, and in any location. We offer the same OpEx model regardless of. Now, if we take a Zadara VPSA as providing that initial backup copy, then that's air gap from the production storage. So that would take the initial backup that then enables Veeam to run a copy job onto another VPSA that is air gapped from the primary one. Could even be on a different VLAN, different login credentials, different multi-factor authentication. Encrypted if necessary, but we know that Veeam can do that, so it's not necessary to do that. The storage layer, and then using a scale-out backup repository option there of using Zadara's object storage, which again can be air-gapped but still part of the same infrastructure, providing an immutable object storage that enables that that 3211 capability. If we then either take the object storage off premises and maybe utilize a service provider for that, or we go the belt and braces approach and we engage with a Veeam VCSP partner, and the VCSP partner is also running Zadara behind the scenes using our scale-out backup repository options there in conjunction with Veeam, where we've got block and object with immutability. And there you've got a further air gap, because the on-premises backup is happening under credentials, under control of the end user. The Cloud Connect capabilities is under the operation of the service provider. Even if the Cloud Connect data is deleted from the on-premises copy, if you're using the immutability copy, there's still a copy in the service provider's data center. So here we're providing multiple levels and multiple tiers, but we're providing this in an OpEx model where you've not got to try and provision storage up front in the hope that you're going to need it. Having that flexibility to utilize it for object or block, depending on changing customer needs, we feel is a valuable asset, especially if you do need to enter into a recovery option, maybe via the VCSP. The VCSP can create a new storage array on demand in 90 seconds. That can be all flash, it can be a hybrid VPSA, or it can be just magnetic media, again, depending on the requirements. And this is where, that tie-in with the ability to, do a restore, test the data capabilities, even off-site, means that, whether you're an enterprise, you're a service provider, or you're a channel partner, it doesn't really matter. You can provide an end-to-end stream here.
Yeah, brilliant. And just to put a finer point, if we go to the next slide, I think there's 4 key things that you mentioned there. The first being this S3 object lock capability to make sure that the data is immutable, meaning it can't be deleted, it can't be modified. And then to be able to do that in a very automated fashion. Right? The solutions have to be seamless. They have to be able to be really a continual part of your operations, not something that's going to impose more restrictions or operational complexity. And you mentioned air gapping in a couple of different areas or layers of the overall data flow. I think that's really critical. And there's a few different ways that a joint solution like this can help achieve that. And then the last is really to best support the business activities, or to your point earlier, Steve, about making sure you're recoverable. That's the whole reason we're going through this data capture exercise, or being able to surface that up for what Veeam calls data labs, meaning instant access to data, perhaps for non-recovery issues, more for DevOps, application testing, to implement that sure backup or that last digit in the zip code of ensuring that you've got an integrated and integral copy of data that doesn't have any errors, 0 errors. and of course be able to hit an antivirus scan in a safe, fenced-off environment. So 3-2-1-1, object lock, automated process, and air-gapped, and then really on-demand to support your current capabilities and processes, and potentially even over and above ransomware. Well, I know we're starting to hit the end of our time, and as we begin to wrap up, just want to call ahead to 3 upcoming things. This Friday, my colleague Corinne Bissett is going to be doing a special Veeam stream or Veeam stream about Office 365 protection and that OpEx model that Steve alluded to, being able to protect O365 without a great deal of upfront costs. Now, Steve, there's also an upcoming drill down or deeper discussion around ransomware that's taking place. Why don't you talk us through that?
Yeah, so as part of the series that we've been doing in conjunction with Veeam, obviously, we've done 2 great sessions, and Corinne joined me yesterday. The next one in that stream is around ransomware, and a deeper look into really what we've touched on today in terms of how you drill into that protection mechanism, how you guard against some of these unique attack vectors, and really how jointly together we offer a simple 100% OpEx capability, regardless of who you are, whether you're an enterprise, a service provider, or a channel partner.
Yeah, brilliant. And I believe we're going to be dropping the URL for that to save your seat for that into the chat. The last thing before we go is I also want to call attention to Veeam 2020. With Veeam, we're going to have a multi-day event June 17th and 18th. We'll be dropping that URL into chat as well. But we're going to have a 2-day event. And Steve, I believe Zadara is also going to be joining us in that activity as well.
Yeah, we're excited to have a booth at the virtual Veeam. Obviously, we're all disappointed that we're not in Vegas right now, doing that as a live event. But taking that to a virtual, I think is going to be great for us to showcase to a different audience what Zadara and Veeam bring together.
Well, brilliant. Well, as we wrap up, I hope you've enjoyed today's discussion, today's stream. If you have questions, feel free to enter them. We'll get back to you as soon as that we can. In the meantime, stay safe, stay positive, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.